Welcome, freaks and shrieks, to the Castle of Spirits True Ghost Stories podcast. This is the Halloween BOO-nanza episode.
BOO-nanza.
BOO-nanza. I am your Ghostkeeper, Jane.
And I am your Ghostkeeper, Vince.
And together, we're the Ghostkeepers. That's how that works. It's math.
1 + 1.
So today, Vince and I have selected from the Castle of Spirits archives. You know, that's where there's 4,600 plus true paranormal and ghost stories collected over 27 years.
Found at castleofspirits.com.
That's right. Anyway, we selected 4 stories. Do we have 4? I have 2. Do you have 2?
I have an older story and I have a brand new story that was submitted
Right.
just in time.
So we have 4 stories, all having to do with Halloween. Because, you know, 'tis the season. It's the most wonderful time of the year.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And having said that, in our home, in our castle,
Mm-hmm.
every day is Halloween.
It's true. It's true. Well, when you live with the menagerie of ghosts and other paranormal haunting things that we do, you can't help but be, a little bit afraid every single day.
And a little bit enthralled, I'd say, too.
Yeah. So shall we get to the stories? That's what the people came here for.
Yes. Do you want to read us a story? Why don't you scare me?
Well, you're scaring me already. So
All right, I'll dial it back.
All right. So my first story is called The Inherited Car and Great Grandma. It was submitted by Chris in Colorado, USA in September of 1999. Through all my years, as much as I can recall, I've never had a truly paranormal experience, except perhaps once. It could have been an odd coincidence, its strangeness magnified by the excitement of the evening, but at the time it happened, it certainly seemed spooky and unexplainable. My great-grandmother passed away on Halloween night, 1983. She was a sweet and dear woman to us all, and her death was somewhat of a surprise, as she was not ill at the time. We lived in suburban Illinois, and she had died in Florida. So when it came time to sort through Grandma's things and sell her house, my family and I flew to Florida, knowing we'd be driving her car back to keep for ourselves, each relative having picked certain items they wanted, and our choice being the car. A little over a year later, I obtained my driver's license and became the official heir of that car, a 1966 Chevrolet Impala, a really cool ride. The car was operationally sound, but had a few small kinks, like a non-functional dome light, etc. It was huge, and I often drove on weekend nights when I'd get together with friends and go out to have fun, party, raise mischief, etc. Being 16 and single, it was usually 4 or 5 guys, causing trouble and trying to avoid the consequences. I wouldn't say we were headed for a lifetime of prison or anything, but we were definitely enchanted by the more mischievous side of life. One particular night, we drove around and decided to teepee a school acquaintance's house. Teepee equals toss huge amounts of toilet paper into trees and shrubs, making said property a forest of white. The teepee job went smoothly enough. By this time, we were all quite experienced and very efficient in our duties. But while we were finishing up, our friend's father came out of the house and started yelling and chasing us. This was great. We grouped together and ran down the street heading for the Chevy. We hadn't locked the doors in order to make a smooth and fast getaway, but we had definitely shut them. Who leaves their car doors open? Running towards the car with maybe 30 feet to go, it happened. The driver's side door slowly creaked open, and that pesky, non-functional dome light turned on. It had never worked, and its fuse had been removed and substituted for the stereo fuse that had blown months ago. The shock of it all registered immediately, but there was no time to stop. We piled into the car and zoomed away. Later on, after the excitement wore off, we talked about the door opening and the dome light coming on. And of course, jokes were made about Grandma watching out for me. Maybe it was her way of reminding me to be good or something. Who knows? It's just unbelievable that the dome light never worked before and hasn't worked since. And the creaking door opening itself? And the timing of it all? We got rid of the car in 1990. Maybe the new owners have fixed it. Or maybe it's fixed them. Thank you again to Chris in Colorado for submitting that story in September of 1999, The Inherited Car and Great Grandma.
Now, I want to know one thing. Mm-hmm. Chris, was your great-grandma named Christine or something? My God.
I mean, she saved them, right?
At first, I thought maybe that the doors were going to lock. And great-grandma was going to be like, well, you learn your lesson. You're going to get busted for TPing this poor man's house. Have you ever been the victim of a TPing?
Yes.
Yeah, it's terrible. You wonder, who is it that hates me?
Yeah. And they even wrote on the driveway, "Hi, Jane."
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I had no idea. I never found out who did it. But I had to clean it up because they wrote my name.
That's messed up.
I know. And then I did TP a house one time. Now, if anyone out there doesn't know what TP is, so this might be,
Then you must use a bidet.
I don't know if that was a horrible joke. I don't know if it's a very American thing or if people all over the world do it, but TP stands for toilet paper. So it's where you go out and you take a roll of toilet paper. The most effective technique for TPing a house is to take the roll of toilet paper and just throw it straight up into a tree and then let it come down, and it just drapes toilet paper all through a tree. And I mean, you can really mess up a yard really quick, and it's hilarious. TPing a house is a lost art. When was the last time you saw a house TP'd?
I haven't. And I was just about to say, kids in the olden days really used to know how to have fun or how to do something nasty without doing something really nasty.
Yeah.
It's like, you TP a house. It's toilet paper.
Yeah.
And if they left some,
it'll biodegrade.
Or you could even roll it up and use it at home.
No.
But, it's like when you're getting into the area of spray painting and breaking windows and stuff, that's bad.
That is bad, yeah. But TP is hilarious. I remember we did TP a house one time. I don't even remember who I was with. I didn't know the person whose house we TP'd, but whoever I was with did know them. It remains one of the most joyful moments of my life. It was great.
I think I was with a couple of kids who were doing the TPing, but I was too scared.
I think we should bring it back. Let's go TP a house tonight. What?
I don't know about that.
Chicken?
I don't know. People around here already look at us with wary eyes.
So speaking of wary eyes, Vince.
Yes.
Do you have a story for us that's not about TP?
I do, in fact.
All right, let's hear it.
I'm really excited, though, because this is a brand new story. Just submitted.
I even haven't read this one yet.
Submitted by Tom S. in Illinois. This one's called Night Shift Ghost. Back in the 90s, I worked as an EMT in a pretty big city in the Midwest. I saw a lot of horrible things, but the one that really sticks with me is something that to this day I can't explain. It happened on Halloween. I was working the night shift. Most nights, we were called out to car accidents, stabbings, or ODs. But on this occasion, we received a dispatch from 911 for an unresponsive male in an apartment block in one of the worst neighborhoods of the city. When we pulled up in front of the building, my partner and I saw the figure of a man lying flat on his back on the sidewalk. We jumped out, grabbed our equipment and stretcher, and got to work. The man looked to be in his 40s or 50s, thick curly hair, a neatly trimmed beard, dressed in jeans and a plaid shirt. We knelt beside him and tried communicating with him, but he didn't respond. We watched for signs of movement and listened for any sounds coming from him. I looked for signs of trauma, blood or obvious wounds, and found nothing. We checked his vitals. His pulse was faint and his breathing was shallow. I glanced around to see if there was anyone who could tell us what had happened, but the area outside the apartment building was empty, a strange thing considering it was a Saturday night. As we moved to lift the man onto the stretcher, someone shouted down from a window above our heads. I looked up to see a woman leaning out of an apartment window 5 stories up, waving her arms. When I asked if she was all right, she said something in Spanish I didn't understand. My partner, who was fluent, came up next to me and called out to her. They exchanged a few words, and she ducked back inside. My partner said, "She's the one who called. They need us on the 5th floor." I pointed behind us at the guy in the stretcher and said, "What about him?" But when I looked down, he was gone. Figuring he must have somehow picked himself up and staggered away, my eyes did a quick scan of our surroundings. There was no one in sight. Even if the guy had been able to move quickly, he couldn't possibly have moved so fast as to disappear the instant we had our backs turned. But that was apparently what had happened. With no time to waste, we picked up our gear and ran up the 5 flights, where an elderly man had fallen and hit his head. We got him to the hospital in short time, but got no answers about the man on the sidewalk. Although we were both confused and a little freaked out, my partner and I never talked about the incident. About a year later, I met a girl who lived in the apartment building across the street. In a city this big, that's unusual, but I think sometimes things happen for a reason. I told her about my one experience there and the disappearing man on the sidewalk. She immediately wanted to know what he looked like. I described him. Somewhere in his 40s or 50s, neatly trimmed beard, thick curly hair. Then her face went dark. "That was Javi," she said. "He used to live in that building." I asked her to tell me more. She hesitated and shook her head like she didn't want to talk about it, but I persisted. "Javi was one of the neighbors when I was growing up," she said. "He dropped dead from a stroke one night, right there on the sidewalk." When I asked her when it had happened, she said, 20 years ago. I said that was impossible, that it must have been someone else. But the expression on her face told me she knew more. Although I didn't get it out of her that night, she eventually opened up. I found out that my partner and I hadn't been the first people to see Javi after he died. Every so often, people would see him. Sometimes he was walking down the street like he was coming home from work. Other times, he was seen standing still and staring at the sidewalk near the area where he'd died. Most of the time, he was gone before anyone could do a double take. But some people in the neighborhood claimed that they'd actually tried to communicate with him, and that he'd seemed not to hear them. Always, when they looked away, even for a second, he would vanish. I've heard stories like this before, only in my case, we hadn't just seen Javi, we touched him. We even lifted him onto the stretcher. Throughout it all, he felt as real to me as anyone else I'd ever tried to help. That's the part that really frightens me. The one thing I can't just put away and forget. I left my job a few months after that. The incident with Javi and what I later learned left me changed. Every time I answered a call, I found myself wondering if the person I was working on was real or a ghost. That's not something to carry with you on a job where every second counts. So I left. The city streets are filled with ghosts, and when you can no longer tell the living from the dead, it's probably best to stay away. And that was Night Shift Ghost, submitted this month, October 2023, by Tom S. in Illinois. That story creeps me out.
Yeah, that story was chilling. It reminds me a lot of that movie, Bringing Out the Dead.
Nicolas Cage?
Yes. It's so good. It's genuinely chilling. It's really sad. It's hilarious. If you haven't seen it, I think you should see it. But anyway, that story was really, really creepy.
I think that there's something about people in that line of work. It reminds me of all the creepy stories that I've ever heard on old late night AM radio shows with police officers calling in and sharing their chilling stories of encounters with really weird stuff. And for some reason, when it comes from somebody like that, a cop or an EMT, or they just have a certain legitimacy.
Yeah, because there's a level of professionalism with them that you expect people in that line of work to be very level-headed, straightforward, and to not be, taken away by flights of fancy or whatever. And for them to have a situation where they're like, I don't know what that was, it lends credence to their story, and it makes it somehow creepier because, they're not just a normal Joe going down the street being like, oh, that's peculiar, must be a ghost.
That's the theme song for every normal Joe in the world.
Yes.
Right. But that does remind me of a conversation we had some time ago on the show where sometimes you see people walking down the street as you're driving by or passing by you as you're walking by them.
Yeah, I think we had this conversation early on in the podcast.
Yeah, and there's nothing really to say whether that person really is there or not.
Yeah, you don't know that everybody else is seeing that person or that even the person in the car with you is seeing that person or... Yeah, absolutely.
But what is really freaky about that story is the fact that they touched the person. Because in almost every story about a ghostly encounter, they're not always necessarily transparent, but there's rarely stories of physical contact with what is otherwise a ghost.
Yeah.
And to think that they had that kind of encounter or that kind of contact with someone who's no longer around kind of freaks me out.
Yeah, it seems
and it must freak him
very
out.
Rare. But still, guys, if you are in or have been or know someone who is in that line of work, any of those kind of public service type jobs, and you've had anything creepy, weird, mysterious happen to you that you just can't explain, let us know.
Doesn't have to be ghosts. It can be.
It doesn't.
UFOs.
There's
cryptids.
stories about police chasing UFOs.
Oh yeah.
About firefighters
fighting phantom fires.
Fighting phantom fires. That's a lot of F's. I almost said fart. But anyway, so Vince, this is a Halloween BOO-nanza, like I said. So I thought it would be fun if we kind of reminisced about Halloweens of old from our own lives and just told little fun Halloween anecdotes.
We've got the antidote for Halloween.
We do. Yeah. So do you have any little Halloween memories from your life that stand out?
I have a memory, and this is kind of funny. I have a memory of having been the potential stalker killer in somebody else's horror movie.
What?
I remember coming home from a Halloween party. I took the bus home.
How old were you?
I was about 13.
Okay.
And the bus stop was about maybe a quarter mile from my parents' house. So, it's suburbia, so I don't have to cross through any dark wooded areas or anything like that. This wasn't a particularly scary area.
Okay.
But apparently I was a scary thing because I was still wearing my Halloween mask.
And what were you dressed as?
I don't know, some kind of monster.
Okay.
In regular street clothes. Because I was 13. I was going to wear one of those silly...
The little plastic jumpsuits.
Yeah, plastic jumpsuits, the little
I know. One of my stories has to do with one of those.
Good God. Did we ever really live through a time like that? Anyway, so I'm walking home and I see ahead of me, maybe about, 200 feet. There's this kid that lives in my neighborhood and rides the bus to school with me. Don't really know him, but he's walking home too. And we live very close to each other. So every time he takes a turn, I take a turn too.
You're all monstered up.
So here I am walking along and he keeps looking back at me. And I notice that he begins to speed up. And I'm just walking at my own regular leisurely pace. And suddenly it occurs to me that he keeps looking back at me because I'm wearing this mask and I'm following him. And you know what? I leaned into it a little bit.
I was going to say, you would have to.
I started walking a little bit faster.
Yeah.
And before you know it, I swear, this kid suddenly breaks into a run. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to go running after the kid.
You're all conspicuous with your arm behind your back and your other arm, like.
Right, like I'm carrying something.
Yeah,
I've got
hiding a knife.
a hatchet.
Uh-huh.
But the way he ran away, though, it was kind of he didn't just. He did break into a run, but he broke into one of those casual runs. Like, I think I'm gonna jog the rest of the way home because
sounds nice.
Right. Here's a leisurely Halloween late night jog home.
Don't panic. Don't panic.
It wasn't the kind of run where you're like your head's thrown back.
Yeah, it wasn't held to breakfast.
And
it was
and your feet are stomping and you're kind of.
That's
but
hilarious.
He disappeared into the darkness beyond the farthest street light that I could see, and I just giggled all the way home.
That's pretty good.
But it's a good thing I didn't look behind because there was probably somebody doing that to me.
But they actually had the hatchet.
Right. It sounds like a setup for the beginning of some, teen horror movie where the dork accidentally scare bullies the slightly more dorky person and ends up impaled on something.
Oh, that really escalated. So that kind of beats any story that I could tell.
Oh,
my favorite, I have, two. So I was pretty young. I think I was 5 for this first one. I wanted to be a ghost for Halloween, but we were moving. We were living in California at the time, and we were moving back to Utah. And my mom had accidentally packed my ghost costume away. And it was like legit, like a sheet with holes cut out. Like it was a standard issue ghost costume. And I was really stoked about it because I always wanted to be something scary for Halloween my entire life. So the ghost costume gets packed up. I'm devastated. I don't have a Halloween costume. So what does my mom do? She goes to the store and she buys one of those little plastic costumes. Now,
cardboard box ones, yeah.
If you were not around in the 80s
or the 70s,
you really missed out. So we had these Halloween costumes back then. It was kind of like, almost like grocery bag, like plastic shopping bags, that type of material, but thicker. And it would come in a package with this really thin plastic molded mask that had like little slits or little like punched out holes for eyes and a little tiny slit for the mouth and not much else.
And a rubber band.
And a rubber band that would hold it to your head. Yeah.
And that was the sort of the centerpiece, the selling point of the product. You didn't really see the quote unquote costume that comes with it, but it looks like a kind of fits you like a smock.
Something. Yeah. But because it's this plastic material, you sound like a crinkling grocery sack wherever you walk. So anyway, so she buys me a costume of Ernie from Sesame Street.
Oh. Did she think he was like a monster or something?
Well, I did like Bert and Ernie, but yeah, I wanted to be something scary. And instead, I was Ernie. So I remember crying because I was so unhappy that I was going to be Ernie. I wasn't going to be something scary. And so I put on my little plastic costume. I think they like tie it around your neck and around the waist too, right?
Yeah, like I said, it fits like a smock.
Yeah.
Kind of.
So, but it was like pants too. Like I seem to remember it fit over your pants. Anyway, so I go to preschool and we had like a little Halloween parade or something. And all of the kids are kind of walking in a line to show off their Halloween costumes. Were walking through the yard. And again, I was really trying to be something creepy for Halloween. So I had my hands up, in claws like monster movie style. And I was going, rawr, rawr. I'm a scary Ernie because I was going to make it a scary costume. And because you couldn't see anything out of those little polka dot holes in the mask. So I tripped over a sprinkler and like hurt my foot.
Oh my God.
I know.
You poor thing.
I know. It was really sad. And then another year, I was going to be a
Oh God, it gets worse.
It was like the next year. Yeah. So I was like 6. I was going to be a vampire, and I was a pretty scared. I have a picture of it somewhere. I'll see if I can dig it up. I was going trick-or-treating with my 2 cousins, and I was a vampire, and I had like blood all over my face, and then just like pretty intense makeup, and then just like a white sheet wrapped around my head and my body. We were all about the white sheet Halloween costume when I was little, and I was kind of scary looking, but so this was like 1984, 3 or 4, something like that. And it was really cold for Halloween, colder than normal. And so to go trick-or-treating, my mom would not let me go without a coat. And I had this big, huge, like really full, fluffy, bright yellow coat. And I was like, I am not wearing this coat on top of my costume. So I had it underneath. And you see this picture.
You wore the coat underneath your costume?
Underneath the sheet.
Oh my God.
So I've got like this horrible Dracula makeup, and I've got this wide-eyed expression. I'm really owning it. And the sheet wrapped around my head and around my body. And I have like this giant potato body. And I think you can see part of the yellow coat like poking out from underneath it. It was the exact opposite of terrifying.
So you were a tick, basically.
I was just a big old bloated tick. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It was kind of cool. Yeah. So
not the best costume ever.
It did make for a great photo, though.
I think the best costume that you and I ever did was when we dressed up as zombies.
Yeah, we did good zombies that one year.
And there's photographic evidence out there that I think that we might want to...
yeah, we can include it in the socials post for this episode.
So if you're on social media, Instagram or Facebook, we are at Castle of Spirits. Come join us and check us out.
And I'll see if my mom can give me a copy of that photo of me and my cousins on that Halloween where I was the tick.
That would be most excellent.
Yeah. So on that note, I have another story.
Oh, yeah, you do? Mm-hmm. Another scary story.
Another scary story. This one is called Bedford Haunting, and it was submitted by David K. in Ohio, USA in September of 2000. Back in 1982, my mother, stepfather, sister, and myself moved into a house in Bedford, Ohio. The house had originally been built by my stepfather's grandfather back in the mid-40s. It was the first house built in that section of the city shortly after World War II. The house was bordered on one side and the back by woods. As soon as we moved in, we knew there was something else in this house with us. It may sound strange to say, but the haunting activity at first was actually very typical of other ghost phenomena. Footsteps going up and down the basement stairs, doors opening and closing on their own, knocking and pounding in the attic. The most unusual events at that time was that whatever it was used to torment my mother by throwing things at her back when she was home alone. It was never anything that would hurt her. It was usually things such as small, lightweight objects like plastic Christmas tree ornaments and the like. It served more to rattle her nerves a bit than to do any damage. But even that became the norm, and we kind of looked at the occurrences as just a neat little quirk of the house. It wasn't until the summer of 1987 that things got really scary. It started about March of that year. My sister, about to turn 5, used to get up in the middle of the night, and my parents would hear her talking to someone. Thinking she had some imaginary friend, they asked her who she was talking to, and she said it was Gamma, her word for grandma. As the months passed by, my sister would wake up during the night less and less, and the rest of the occurrences seemed to stop altogether. Then, in early June, the house was peaceful. Well, inside the house anyway. My mother worked in an office in Warrensville Heights, about 10 to 15 minutes drive from our house, and on her lunch hour, she would drive home and lay out in the sun on a raft in our pool for about 20 minutes or so before going back to work. One day, as she was laying out and happened to look over toward the woods, she saw a man standing in the tall weeds at the tree line, about 30 or 35 feet from the side of the pool. She said he appeared to be wearing a very expensive 3-piece suit, but his hair was all messed up, and his eyes were opened very wide, and he had this weird grin on his face. She ran into the house and called the police, who came but found no footprints in the mud or no trampled weeds where he was standing. Needless to say, she didn't lay out when no one else was home for a long time after that. A few weeks after that, I was home alone babysitting my sister when she wanted to go swimming. So I was in the pool relaxing, and she was splashing around, and I happened to look into the woods. Up in this dead tree, which was directly behind my house, I saw something that to this day I remember clear as day. It was some sort of creature, for lack of a better word. It was squatting on the largest limb. It was white or light gray in color, very long, thin arms and legs. Its fingers were long and pointed. Its head was large. Its eyes were perfectly round and black, and its mouth was just a slit that went from one side of its head to the other. I stared at it for a minute or so, thinking that I must be seeing a reflection of light or something. Then, as I was moving across the pool to get a different angle on it, it actually turned its head to follow my movement. I grabbed my sister and jumped out of the pool and ran to the back door. I looked back just before I went through the door, and it was gone. For days after that, strange noises would come from the woods at night. Noises I've never heard before or since. I tried to record some of the sounds, but I never got anything clear on my tape. My stepfather had something throw rocks at him one night when he was out back, but when he went into the woods the next day, there was no sign of any prints or disturbance. The woods were very overgrown, and no one could walk through them without leaving some sign of being there. This sort of thing went on until October, ironically, Halloween. I was out taking my sister trick-or-treating. My stepfather was working late, and my mother was handing out candy on the front porch. At about 8, trick-or-treating was winding down, and there weren't any more kids on our street. My mom was picking up, getting ready to go inside, when she looked up and saw this very tall man coming up the walk. He was walking very slowly and was wearing a black ski mask. She jokingly said something like, "Little old for trick-or-treating," but the man didn't say a word. He just kept walking toward her. My mom got scared and went behind the screen door and called the family dog over, a pretty large shepherd/lab mix. The man saw the dog and turned around and slowly began to walk back down the front walk. My mom looked down at the dog, then looked back, and the man was gone. This ended the outside occurrences. Slowly, the inside stuff began again, which was a relief for us, and things returned to normal. I don't know if what happened inside and what happened outside were connected, only that one started when the other stopped. I moved out the next year and into an apartment with my then girlfriend. We got evicted in '93 and moved back into the house. My mother and stepfather divorced a couple years earlier, and he and my sister still lived there. He moved to Maryland to get a new job and rented my girlfriend and I the house for the next 2 years. In that time, the haunting continued like always. although it seemed to intensify when my girlfriend was home alone. My stepfather decided to sell the house, and as we were packing, I finally saw the ghost. I was watching TV the night before we moved the last of our stuff out when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. It was a ball of what looked like smoke, kind of like cigarette smoke, but not quite. It floated slowly out of the bathroom door past me, about 2 or 3 feet from my face, turned and disappeared into the darkness of the kitchen. I think it knew I was leaving for good and wanted me to see it before I left. I don't know if the new owner has had any experiences since he's moved in, but I can't see any reason why it would go away. So thank you again to David K. in Ohio, USA for submitting Bedford Haunting in September of 2000.
Oh my God. I've never heard of a haunting that moves from the inside of a house to the outside.
And then back.
And then back. And I'm not convinced that it was the same thing. I mean, when you have a headache and you break your foot, your head stops hurting.
Yeah.
Until the foot heals, and then your head starts hurting again. Hopefully by then it's gone, but hey, this is just an example.
And what an example it is.
And a bad one at that.
A very bad one, yeah.
But you get my drift. The haunting to them seemed like it was something kind of quaint and comforting, but then you've got this thing that seems to have arrived in their backyard.
Yeah.
At first I was thinking, throwing rocks, that sounds like Bigfoot.
Yeah.
That's typical squatchy behavior.
The rocks thing did, but then...
Of course, Bigfoot doesn't approach people's front doors on Halloween wearing a ski mask.
Yeah, but the guy in the back in the 3-piece suit with the disheveled hair and kind of the 1,000-yard stare.
Right.
That was a really creepy imagery. It kind of reminded me of the cemetery zombie in Night of the Living Dead. But the reason I really wanted to read that story was the thing that he saw in the tree. That was terrifying to me. I almost kind of pictured, I believe it's called a frog-mouthed owl. But then he also described it as having very long, thin arms and legs and fingers. But a frog-mouthed owl is kind of a creepy looking bird.
I think something happened outside that property that opened up some sort of portal.
And maybe it's just like a ghost that likes summer, because he talked about, all these things happening inside. But then as soon as it got to be like the summer months, it moved outside. And
I got it.
Halloween was the last time it was outside, and then it moved back in. See, guys, if you're cold, they're cold. Let them in. That goes for ghosts too.
But not the big guy that comes to the door.
Don't let the guy in the ski mask in. You know better. You're much smarter than that.
All right, so we have got one more story to share with the audience.
Yes.
And if you think that Bedford Haunting was scary, I got a House of Horrors coming up next.
Yay.
I found a story on the Castle of Spirits website that reads like a potpourri of hauntings, or maybe just like the textbook, all the scary stuff you can think of happening under one roof. It was submitted to the website by David in North Carolina, all the way back in September of 2005. And David shares his true story, which he calls 3-Story Terror. This is a true story. It is not a fake tale to try to scare young children or entertain adults. Some may think this is not even scary at all, but being that I was 6 at the time, I was terrified, and I still am. The house I live in now with my father was built from 1997 to 1998. During the period that my father was building it, strange things began to occur. He'd work at night, usually from 9 to 10 p.m., to try to finish up any projects that he had been working on. On many occasions, he told me that he would see the house glow red from the inside. Being that it was late at night, the sun would have already gone down and would not have been able to cast a red glow. I remember one night he came into the house shaking and pale. He told my mother and me that a demonic voice had called his name. He was terrified and called our neighbor to see if he'd been playing a sick joke on him, but to our horror, the neighbor was at work. The house was finally finished and we moved in on October 31st, 1998. The first year we lived there was uneventful and no strange phenomenon occurred. One night, I was lying on the couch watching TV when I heard what sounded like a child's voice. It was in a foreign language, so I couldn't understand what it was saying. I thought somebody was in the basement, so I ran upstairs to where my parents were and told them about my experience. Both of them confessed to hearing the same thing. My dad thought he was going crazy, and he felt a lot better once he knew that others were hearing the same things. We had a long talk about it, and we decided that there was a ghost in our house. One day, my parents had company over, and were having a nice little chit-chat in the living room when the voice spoke out. Everybody in the room heard it, but not wanting to draw up any suspicion, my mom said that it was just me playing in the basement. I was at my grandparents' at the time. We had a priest come and bless our house, every room on every floor, and fortunately for us, the priest heard it too. For a while the voices stopped, but unfortunately they returned a short while after. My father discovered that my mom was having an affair, and there was much controversy in the house when this was going on. After my parents got a divorce, the voices were not heard again. That changed about 2 years ago. My father and I are hearing the same voice again, but the experience has worsened with me. I see faces and people looking, staring at me. They watch me and mutter among themselves, then laugh. I just watch in horror and pray that they won't harm me. Then they just disappear. My father and I also hear dishes crashing, but when we go to investigate, there's nothing there. I see things, dark, evil things lurking in dark corners. My father has seen some of these things, but not as many as me. I carry a cross with me wherever I go in my house. I am 13 and believe deeply in the supernatural and the unexplained. Some people might say, oh, he's just seeing things and it's in his imagination. But how do you explain others hearing it? My house is Victorian style and is filled with many antiques. I've often wondered if any ghosts or demons have stuck to our furniture and are not willing to give it up. I guess I'll just have to see. And that was 3-Story Terror, submitted by David in North Carolina back in September of 2005. David, if you're out there, write us and let us know if anything else happened, how things turned out.
Yeah, we need an update on that. And might I say, while you were reading, I was doing the math. This happened when I was 6 years old in 1998. And I was like, wait a minute. This story was submitted in 2000. Is this person 13 years old? That was so well written.
He is. He's very
articulate.
That word.
Yeah.
He's very that.
Which you are not. But one thing I thought was interesting was he said that it stopped after his parents got divorced when his mother left. And so I almost was wondering if it was kind of like a poltergeist thing. I mean, typically that's associated with adolescence, but I think that anyone with strong emotional, internal turmoil can probably be responsible for, causing a poltergeist type experience. And so maybe his mother was, clearly she was going through something. Maybe it was a poltergeist because of her. And then David said that it started 2 years ago again. And David is 13. So 2 years ago would have been like kind of the cusp of adolescence. And so maybe it's, it's all in the family.
I have mixed feelings about whether or not I believe that pent up psychic energy can result in supernatural
Really?
phenomenon.
You don't believe in a poltergeist?
Well, it's not that I don't believe in it. I really question how it works because like you indicated, that the person has to have some sort of maybe psychic ability to begin with in order to have that sort of thing manifest, because there's certainly no shortage in the world of bad, toxic environments that should yield paranormal activity left and right. And I grew up in one of those. I mean,
didn't we all? Who among us?
Yeah. I always thought, if my home life when I was a kid, when my sister was in her teens and when I was in my teens, if shit didn't start flying around the house and bashing people on the head, then it's not going to happen anywhere else.
If your sister didn't cause a poltergeist.
Right. But maybe she's not psychic, although there are certain things that she's told me that lead me to believe that there may be some sort of psychic thing.
Well, I think we've all got it a little bit. I think it's a skill like anything else. Just because you don't have it, or you don't have it strongly, you're not able to control it, doesn't mean that somebody else isn't more skilled in that area.
If you ask me, as someone who has written resumes professionally before, I think something like that would go great on a resume.
Oh boy.
Skills, being able to lift heavy objects
with my mind.
Although don't ask me to put it any place particular, because it's probably going to end up hitting the wall and smashing things up.
It's going to fly across the room. That's the part I can't get under control.
Right. Are you hiring for that? Because I've got that.
I'm really good at collecting flies on a window.
Right? Mm-hmm. That could be something. Now, some industrious person out there needs to invent a job where these things can pay money.
I think they have that.
What's it called?
It's called a ghost television show host.
A TV ghost hunter?
Yeah.
Most TV ghost hunters, well, they claim to have a lot of psychic ability and things like that, but I'm not
on board with them.
I'm not entirely convinced, let's just say.
But you know what we have never told our friends about that I think that they would really like?
I don't know. We're going to go there.
Ghost Watch.
Oh, Ghost Watch. Yes. Yeah. I thought you were going to talk about something else.
Oh boy. If you've never seen Ghost Watch, you have to, I think the only way you can see it is to buy the DVD. So we bought the DVD and it's brilliant. It's from, what was it, 1993?
1992. One of those live, it was a
quote unquote live
on UK television.
Yeah, on the BBC.
Michael Parky was the host of the show.
So it
was kind of like I don't know, kind of like a War of the Worlds type thing where they pretend it's a real live broadcast.
And
about
people
ghosts. Were
actually freaking out in real life. There's a really good episode on the Criminal podcast about it. And it's hilarious. People were like calling in, talking about my kid passed out, or, we're so scared. But there's this house that's supposedly haunted, and a mother and her two daughters live there. And, the camera crews like descend on it to get evidence. And then this whole the camera crew and the people in the studio, and then the host presenter guy himself, they all become like possessed. And it's
a riot.
It's so good. You should watch it. It's also extraordinarily cheesy, but weirdly, my favorite part is the scientist that they bring on to kind of be the counterbalance, to the medium. Yeah. They've got the medium who's like, "Oh, all of this is so real," right, with her British accent, and then they bring on the American scientist guy who sounds exactly like Jeff Goldblum.
He does. He sounds like Jeff Goldblum, just a little bit sped up. Looks nothing like the guy.
No.
But if you close your eyes, you're like, well, Jeff.
Yeah.
Jeff's here.
But Ghost Watch, guys, you got to see it. It's so good. We'll put a link to it in the attic on castleofspirits.com so you can check it out.
And dude, do that indeed. Mm-hmm. I think that you and I should put that on Halloween night and pretend it's a live broadcast. I'll start the DVD, keep the television turned off, and then I'll turn the TV on. Let's see what's on TV. Oh, what's this? And now that we have regaled all of you with a
BOO-nanza of Halloween.
A BOO-nanza, a quadruple shot of horror from the Castle of Spirits archives. We would like to hear from you. Tell us your scary stories, any scary event that's happened to you. Go to castleofspirits.com, go to the submit section and tell us your story. In the meantime, if you want to read scary stories, check out the library that we have 4,600 true reader-submitted ghost stories and paranormal encounters.
And we'd like to add yours to the lot.
We sure would. And of course, there's a whole bunch of these podcast episodes that you should check out, listen to, and let us know what you think about us. And if you really want to help us out, guys, most people who listen to this show listen on Apple Podcasts. If you do, please leave us a review, a star rating, if you can.
Just but only if it's 5. Just
no,
kidding.
no.
I'm just kidding.
4 and above. But, and a few words, if you want to just put a few words about great show, whatever. We don't need you to write a novel. And that every review that we receive at Apple Podcasts greatly helps the visibility of this show.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are able to leave a review on some other podcast platform, we welcome that as well too.
Yep.
And as we always say, if you like the show, tell a friend.
And if you hate it, tell 2 enemies.
Maybe even 3 this time.
It's Halloween. Let's get in the spirit. How about 4?
Well, if somebody has 4 enemies, I kind of worry about them, and maybe they shouldn't worry about helping us.
Just tell 4 people. No matter how you feel about the show, just tell 4 people.
We'll tell 4 annoying people.
And there's the music coming down the hall of the castle,
urging us to our end.
It's time to feed the ghosts, and right now, they know that it's almost Halloween. They are expecting full-size Snickers.
Oh my God, did you pick anything up?
I didn't.
All right, we're gonna
I have a couple
out.
Butterfingers left over from last year, but Franklin, that weird ghost with the hat, he's not going to be happy.
Those things
that.
Go fast too.
I know.
We got to go get something.
Okay.
This is ridiculous. You have to go get. I have to. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So guys, we have to go take care of some serious business.
Yeah. So, happy Halloween, our friends. And just remember, here at the castle, it's Halloween year round. So we'll see you next week for more.
Trick or treat.